we'll dig into that here in a minute, but I feel like I might have got ahead of my skis a little bit because I want to hear the origin story. And if you're a listener and you're listening to this point, lest you be misled into thinking like Mythic is just this tiny little startup. Like Mythic's making great progress in a hurry. I mean, the company has become sizable, well funded. We'll get into the details, but you've done something from nothing in a relatively short period of time. But before we get any further into that, I want to hear about like the two guys and the idea.
Yeah, let's do it. So I left Flagship. I had a office mate and fellow Flagship associate leave, Alex Nichols, who was my co-founder. And after we both left Flagship, we decided to team up and start something.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first 9 months, it was two guys around a living room table. Funny enough, Alex ended up moving in right next to me without even knowing it. It was just a complete accident. And so we somehow convinced our wives to let us not have jobs and just go over to each other's place and sit around the living room table thinking about how to start a biotech.
Wow, that's pretty convincing. We'll spend some time offline. Teach me those ways. So here you found yourself with the grace of your wives graciously giving you the opportunity to sit around and brainstorm for a few months. Where does that even start? Like, did one of you have a seed in a science, or did one of you have a motivation and a specific indication, or did one of you have some semblance of a target idea? Like, what was the, I guess, nucleus of the conversation? Like, where'd you start?
Right. Well, and maybe going back to Flagship, this is something that Flagship had prepared us well for, right? This stage of, what do you do when you're at zero? And how do you potentially build something on paper and then test, is that going to work or not? I think at a high level, your job as a very early stage entrepreneur who's just starting out is to take bad ideas seriously. And what I mean by that is, before something is a good idea, like a CRISPR or ADCs, for example, usually before that, the reason why it's so popular and the hot new thing is because before that, it was a bad idea. Maybe it was a bad idea because no one thought it would work. Maybe it was a bad idea because no one could do it, right? But it wasn't something, before it was a big thing, it was something that, in a hot new thing, it was something that not a lot of people were thinking about. And so I think what we did a lot of was the process of thinking about things that weren't in favor, but trying to understand why people weren't super excited, why they weren't a hot thing already, and then evaluating, well, how could we be part of and build a company that could be part of changing that? And that's what we found with ADCs. We became fascinated with ADCs. I think even back in 2017, when we started working on ADCs, the clinical results were oftentimes nothing to write home about, but they did show that the drug worked. Oftentimes the typical story would be, let's say, solid tumor indication, 20% response rate, but the responders oftentimes were highly concentrated in these patients that expressed very high levels of the target. So what's going on there? Well, eventually we became very excited about that sort of data because it suggested that if you had a patient who could deliver enough ADC to their own tumor by virtue of very high target expression, then they would respond. Whereas for even intermediate, especially low expressing patients, you couldn't get a response because the antibody component of the ADC wasn't efficient enough at delivering the payload to the tumor. And so with that realization of what was going on, we thought clinically for a lot of different targets, particularly in solid tumors, plus the fact that the antibody side of the ADC equation hadn't really been looked at very much, we got very excited about, hey, here's a field that's a bit out of favor, but by taking a new approach, we might actually unlock something that's holding the entire field back.
Was your co-founder a scientist by training as well?
Yep. So Alex is a PhD as well.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. It's important context because I envision these conversations where you're having you're having an intellectual discussion about a therapeutic area. I don't know if he didn't have chops to understand the conversation, it'd be a difficult one to sell. In those early intimate one-to-one conversations, it'd be difficult to I guess create an environment where you're both sort of rallying around the same concept. What were the concerns? Like, to your point, the ADC space was established but not thriving. Like, ADC has been around for a while, but it certainly wasn't the ADC landscape that we see today back in 2017. So you had a concept that would change the paradigm, change sort of the status quo of what had been happening in the ADC space. But what were I guess maybe red flags? Like, what were some of the concerns that needed to be overcome?
Right.
To put your stake in the ground and say, yeah, you know what? Like, let's go try to chase this thing down.
Sure. I think there's a general red flag when you're pursuing maybe a contrarian idea,
Mm-hmm.
in that you're going to have to tell your story in order to make people get it, instead of people coming to you and saying, oh, you're an ADC company and it's 5 years later. And of course I would join an ADC company. Of course I would invest in an ADC company. So I think generally that's something that we had to overcome.
Were you conscious of that from the outset? Like, where, as you discussed this, the concept, where you're like, yeah, but boy, I don't know how warm the VC community is going to be if we just pop up and say, hey, these ADCs that people have been struggling with for so long, we think we got to figure it out. Give us some money.
Yeah, there's a great story that our lead investor, Brian Roberts of Venrock, tells, that when he first did diligence on us for the Series A, he called up, his oncology experts, and they said, ADCs, why are you doing something in ADCs, Brian? This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You should go do cell therapy, go do something else. So it's those sort of reactions, but I think people like Brian were actually willing to listen to what we had to say, which, I'm especially appreciative of, because we're not the 50-year biopharma veterans coming and saying this is the next thing. We're the, guys who spent 2 years at Flagship coming to tell you, we were in the living room and we thought that this would be a good idea, and maybe a little bit of evidence that goes along with that. But yeah, it is something to overcome. On the other hand, I think we're taking such a different approach at Mythic. I still feel like we have, convincing to do. I think the ADCs are hot right now, so we're kind of in that category, but we're not a linker payload company. And when I think people think of an ADC company, I actually think they're really thinking of a linker payload company. And so I still think we haven't quite hit our hot moment yet.
So unpack that a little bit, like compare and contrast Mythic to I guess assumed linker payload company, like the company that everyone just assumes when they think ADC. Like, what's different about you?
Right. So maybe as I started to introduce beforehand in this conversation, we focus on the antibody component of the ADC rather than the linker payload component. And we design antibodies that can deliver more of that payload really to cancer cells where you want it, and less payload to normal cells where you don't want it.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Whereas a lot of, like, I was just looking at some ADC companies this morning in preparation for a project we're working on that's gonna show up a little bit later in the year, and I found that many of them, like, that their antibodies are coming in from an outsourced provider. Like, so you're saying, like, you're doing that antibody development in-house. What is the linker technology then outsourced at Mythic?
Yeah, so for our first program, we're using VCMMAE, which is a well-known linker payload. Our platform is fundamentally agnostic, right? So we've shown our technology works with VCMMAE. We've shown it works with topoisomerase inhibitor payloads. We've shown it works with DNA toxins. So regardless of what we attach to the antibody, it will deliver more. And you're right, though, in that I think the reason why no one has really focused on the antibody up to this point, other than Mythic, is because some of the challenges behind the linker payload historically were so difficult to overcome. And I think having overcome some of those challenges is why the ADC field is experiencing so much success right now. But the question is, what's the next generation? What's going to solve the problems that we have now, not the problems that we had 20 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. What are the problems now? Like, the problems 20 years ago, I think we could reflect on that toxicity and payload and trying to get the equation right. So assuming that we've gotten to a point where that has been figured out, what challenges do you face now? Like, what are the problems now?
Yeah. So, one of the most inspiring visions for the field, and it's not necessarily my vision, but I will ascribe to it, is that ADC should replace chemo, right? Because they're more efficacy, less toxicity. Just the word chemo, we try to avoid even using the word chemo in association with what we're doing with ADCs, although many of the payloads, technically they are chemo. Just the word chemo makes you think of, maybe someone who has cancer, who has the potential to get better, but it's not going to be a fun experience, right?
Right.
So I think that's one of the most inspiring visions. But if we're actually going to do that, and we're actually going to replace chemo with ADCs, we're going to have to get ADCs to work for broad segments of patients and many different targets. And right now we're in a place where, at least in solid tumors, ADCs work really well for targets that are very highly expressed. So HER2 in breast cancer and a couple of other cancers, Nectin-4 in bladder cancer. These are very highly expressed targets. But where ADCs don't work currently are lower expressed targets, and specifically patients who have a target, but it isn't expressed at those super high levels. And so being able to treat patients with intermediate levels of expression, low levels of expression, being able to look at targets that don't have, hundreds of thousands of copies per cell, like a HER2 or a Nectin-4, and being able to look at patients who are inherently resistant to the payload, that's really what's going to allow us to replace chemo.
Yeah. And so back up a few years, when you were, you gave a great example of Brian, one of your lead investors, jumping on board. When you were out there trying to raise that Series A and in subsequent fundraising efforts, I'm curious about what were the keys to winning that favor in a market that, especially in those early days, was, I don't want to say frowned upon. That might be too strong, but certainly not in favor. So what was it sort of your vision for where ADCs go next, and the way that you would go about putting them together? In cases like, what were some of the keys to getting winning that favor of the VC community?
I think telling a big story really well and very clearly and succinctly, and then not giving up. Just trying over and over and over again in the face of failure. So I think I've probably been in 500 investor conversations, like distinct investor conversations at this point, and only a handful of those were ever yeses.
Yeah. Did you, this is totally out of left field, just curious though, because you're young and because your co-founder was young as well. Like when you guys, you're still young. I don't want to age you, but in 2016, 2017, like, a couple of years experience coming out of your PhD program. Did you experience any, I don't know if you'd call it, would it be called ageism? If people like, I don't know, you're out there doing the circuit, trying to raise some money to get a company started. And, did you ever get any perception from some of the VCs that like, who's this kid? Like, what's he looking to do? Go around the block a few times and then come back and see me.
Yeah, well, during that process, we definitely went around the block many different times.
Yeah.
I like how you frame that. Maybe I'm a little older now. I certainly have a few more gray hairs.
Oh, well, yeah, the business will do that to you.
It will. Um, Look, I don't know. I can't say. I can imagine, different places. It maybe have gone different ways. Maybe people were excited that young folks with our background were trying to do something new, and maybe it made them listen and pay attention to what we were doing more. But I'm very thankful for having found people like Brian, like Kareem Helmy at Viking, who's one of our other lead investors, Dan Farrow at Omics, Josh Koppelman at First Round to start it all off in our seed round, who were willing to listen to what we had to say. And I would also say, a big moment for Mythic was when we raised our angel round. And so it wasn't just me and Alex, it was me and Alex and a group of angels who, for some unknown reason, well, hopefully for good reasons, that they saw something here that they wanted to invest in Mythic instead of doing anything else they could have done with that money. And so during our angel round, we raised about $750,000 in summer of 2017. And that was about 9 different C-level biotech execs.
Yeah.
And so at that point, again, it wasn't just us, it was us plus these, we're borrowing the credibility and advice of our angel investors in order to, grow and move forward.
Yep. Yeah. So tell us about what you're putting the money that you've raised today toward. Tell us a little bit about the clinical program, you tell me where you want to start. You talked about how Flagship sort of takes this approach generally around let's build a platform or a technology and then figure out what we do with it from a therapeutic standpoint. You kind of took the opposite route, yet you've landed on you've got a platform, right? I mean, the company has a platform now. So I guess tell us a little bit about the build out of that and what it's producing and yeah, the brick and mortar that's put together as a result of your investment success.
Sure. So we have built a platform. We've gone very broad with our platform. So we've applied this engineering on the antibody side that allows us to deliver more payload to cancer cells and less to normal cells across about 20 different targets. We inserted our engineering into over 100 different clinical stage ADC antibodies, and we're on candidate number, I think, 16,000 at this point.
Wow.
So
yeah.
We've done this a lot, and we built a platform and a team that's very good at doing this very quickly. Out of that effort, right? Because I think what we saw was a potential for this type of engineering to result in a therapeutic that would have an impact on these lower expressing, less sensitive patients. We very quickly found where that technology worked really well. And one of those was MET, which is the target of our lead drug. We also found where it didn't work. And I think that's part of, in my vision, at least, even if you want to make, just are interested in making the drug, if you have some sort of an insight on how to do that, you're never going to avoid a messy car accident between your technology and target biology, right? Some things science allows them to work, some things it doesn't. And so we went very broad, very early to try to figure that out. Where was it working the easiest, the quickest, the fastest, the best? And so that was MET, at least initially. And so our lead ADC is ADC targeted against MET. It's currently in a phase 1 dose escalation, dose expansion trial as monotherapy in non-small cell lung cancer. And we're nearing the tail end of the dose escalation portion. We're working with a number of sites, and I'm just incredibly grateful to the sites and the patients who have been on this journey with us so far.
Yeah. How big is the company now? I mentioned that your growth was pretty rapid. I mean, once things got rolling, I mean, you've got a pretty sizable outfit now. So how many employees are with Mythic?
So we're at about 40 right now. I'm at our world headquarters here in Waltham.
Yeah. Very nice.
Just one location to date.
Yeah. What are the, intentions? I mean, obviously it's early, you're in phase one, but what are the intentions longer term? And this is the question that I always love to ask because, I can always sort of gauge like just how transparent a founder or CEO is in their response to this question. Like, well, you know what? Our intentions are to, uh, build a molecule that is ripe for acquisition, or build a molecule that we can take to a certain point and actively sell or partner, or we want to take this thing to the finish line. We want to build a full service biopharmaceutical company that works in a specific area of indications. And with the caveat that opportunity presents itself and those plans can all change. So I'm not holding anyone to anything, but like, this is your first go at founding a company around a molecule and an idea that you and your co-founder, kind of put together on your own. There's got to be a strong sense of ownership, right? Around what you're doing. I'm sure you've put a lot of time, money, and intellect into it. What would you like to see happen? Like, let's put it that way. Like, what would you like to see happen with this company? Where would you like to take the company?
I'd like to cure some patients, or at least make some patients feel a lot better. And it's exciting to be in clinic and doing some of that right now. But obviously, we have to go through a number of stages of development before we have an even bigger impact. And so, where I would want to go with the company is building an enduring multi-product oncology company. We've done a lot of engineering, like I talked about, and we've seen the impact that this sort of an approach can have. We started out with, so-called pH engineering to accomplish this effective, more delivery to tumor cells and less delivery to normal cells. But we have subsequent generations of different types of engineering that we can also achieve the same effect and combine it with pH engineering. And so it's great to have a lead program, but we're building a pipeline behind that. We have a second program, which will come to start IND enabling work this year for a potential IND file at the end of next year. And so building an enduring multi-product oncology company that can have the full impact of what we've discovered with our technology and our approach.
Yeah. That technology, the discovery, I mean, you mentioned, 16,000 iterations, right now, one clinical candidate. Someone who isn't like intimately familiar with the way that this business works and discovery works would look at it and go, if I made 16,000 widgets today and none of them were quite right and walked out with one, that'd be a pretty frustrating experience. And this is going to lead back to, I mean, and obviously most of our audience understands how this business works. But at the same time, you build an organization, 40 people now, 40 people and growing, plus partners and, manufacturing partners. And you mentioned this earlier, the culture at Mythic, the team and sort of the mission. It can be a frustrating industry to work in if you don't embrace those odds and that, quote unquote failure rate. So share with me a little bit about that. It's a young company led by young people. You've built this organization. It's a tough business to be in. What does Brian Fisk do to build and maintain a culture of, positivity and momentum and excitement about what you guys are doing there?
So first off, it's the amount of work required to do, numbers 1 through 15,999 is far less than the work that's required to take one into clinic. And so I guess that's the first thing that I would say. We're fortunate to have been able to build a platform where it doesn't cost us much to do multiple cycles of iteration with hundreds and hundreds of candidates, thousands of candidates on any given program. And we keep a very high bar for what we take into clinic. Essentially, it's got to be best in class. It's got to be treating some very sick patients, of whom there are a lot of them. in order for us to get motivated to bring something into clinic. And I think that's very motivating for people. One of the, and maybe I talked about it before in general terms, but one of our core values at Mythic is what we call patient-centered science, in that we get really excited about science that's going to have an impact in patients, and letting that impact in patients lead, like what that drug looks like and the effect it's going to have, lead us to what sort of technologies would we have to do in order to accomplish that, rather than the other way around. Yeah. And I think that's been very motivating to a lot of folks. A lot of folks have come to us, come to work with us from other companies where maybe they had a really exciting technology, but it never really translated into a drug that had an impact on patients. And so, that's not everybody. Some people like to work on technology. Some people like to, do other things, but that's the folks that we've attracted at Mythic. And so keeping that really high bar, being really sure that we are giving ourselves the best shot possible to have something that could really impact patients. When we make that decision to put something into IND enabling studies, that's been a core part of who we are.